This episode is sponsored by The Alcohol Experiment, a free 30-day challenge designed to interrupt your patterns, give you control, restore your health, and put you back in touch with the version of you who doesn't need alcohol to cope, relax, or enjoy life. More than 220,000 people have already tried The Alcohol Experiment for themselves and have seen improved sleep, increased happiness, reduced anxiety, and so much more. Join thousands in this inspiring, hopeful, and exciting program where you examine your beliefs and reconnect with the best version of you without ever feeling like you're missing out. Start today for free at alcoholexperiment.com. Hi, this is Annie Grace, and welcome to the Naked Vowing podcast. Today, I am super excited about a guest we have. We have Elizabeth Vargas. She's actually an Emmy award-winning journalist, the author of the New York Times bestseller Between Breaths, which is a memoir of panic and addiction. She broke barriers when she revealed that she had alcohol use disorder during a televised interview in 2014. And today she candidly shares her story to help and inspire others. She's also a proud board member of the Partnership to End Addiction, a national nonprofit that provides families with personalized support and resources and all sorts of amazing stuff. And she also hosts a podcast called The Heart of the Matter with Elizabeth Vargas, where she gives guests the opportunity to share their personal, candid stories, which is amazing. So I'm so excited to have Elizabeth here with us today. Well, welcome, Elizabeth. It's such a pleasure to have you here.
Thanks, Annie. It's so nice to meet you. I've been a fan of you and your podcast for a long time.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. That's amazing. So why don't you sort of take us back to the beginning in your story? And your story is so interesting, and I'm so excited to hear it directly from you, which is just going to be thrilling. But I'd love for you to just back way up to your childhood, your first drink, and sort of let it unfold for us.
Well, I'm an Army brat, so I grew up almost completely overseas, and we moved a lot. It was a very nomadic existence, so that there really, like every single thing in my life changed pretty dramatically every year or two. You know, we would move to a different country or a different house or a different Army base. I had different teachers, different friends, different neighbors, all that to say that the only constant in my life was sort of my nuclear family. And for a kid who was anxious as I was, it was looking back, at least I can't say if it actually fed my anxiety, but it definitely made it so that nobody really ever had the chance to notice it and pull me aside. I was always anxious, but when I was 6 years old, my dad went away to Vietnam, and during that year he was gone, I had daily massive panic attacks. And now in hindsight, it's very, of course, my father's away at war, my mother is leaving for work every morning before I go to first grade, and I had a tremendous, abandonment and separation anxiety. But my mom didn't do anything. Like, she never even said, like, what's wrong, which, shocked me. I didn't even realize that until years later, in my adulthood when I was in rehab. And I said, what did you say to me to comfort me during those panic attacks? And she said, well, nothing. I didn't know what to do. So,
how did it manifest? Was it like just crying, or like how
I would cry and sob and beg and plead with her not to leave me. And I would hold on tight to her clothes, whatever she was wearing, and force her to drag me as she walked to the car every morning because, I was desperate for her not to leave me. And, this was a time, we were in Okinawa at that point. It was a staging area for a lot of the American troops going into and out of Vietnam. And, we weren't even helping Vietnam vets with PTSD and all their mental health issues. Nobody was certainly helping the children of these vets. So, I had these massive panic attacks every single day, and my mom never did anything. And then she was pregnant, she's only 29, she's pregnant, she had 2 young kids, she had her husband away at war where a lot of people were dying. And the night she went away to go give birth to my sister, a neighbor came over to watch my brother and me, and I started to have another panic attack as she left to go give birth. And I jumped out of my bed and started running through the house to stop her and do my normal panic attack thing. And the neighbor lady stopped me and looked me very closely, and she said, "What is the matter with you?"
Mm.
And in that moment, I realized that my anxiety was something I needed to hide, and felt like it was something very shameful. And from then on out, everything I did, I tried very, very hard to keep it hidden. It's actually incredibly amazing that I didn't turn to alcohol before I did for my anxiety, but I was such a control freak. I still am. That the thought of being drunk and out of control terrified me. In high school, I would pretend to be drunk. I would take tiny sips of alcohol because it scared me. And I didn't drink at all in college because the only thing around was beer, and I hated beer. And so I really didn't start drinking until, and I white knuckled my way through childhood, adolescence, college years, keeping my anxiety a secret and never telling anyone about it. And then when I started working in television news, my first job, it's a very high pressure job. And it was sort of a tradition after the newscast that we all scrambled all day long to put together. And we would all go to a local bar and have a drink and toast our failures or commiserate over getting beaten by the competition. And that was when I first discovered the power of a glass of Chardonnay for me.
Mhm.
That was my beverage of choice. And having one or two of those, instantly the world was softer and rosier, and everybody was smarter and prettier and more interesting, including me. And all my anxieties melted away. And I think, that was the hardest part for me, because alcohol worked at first. It
Mhm.
worked. It helped wave the magic wand over my life and make the anxiety dissipate, if only for a few hours.
That's so true. And I think it's the trap, especially when we're drinking and we have this underlying pain, then it actually, like science shows us, it works differently in the brain. And so that first drink can be like, wow, where has this been my entire life?
Yeah.
This feels how life should feel. I shouldn't be feeling that way. I should feel this way. But of course, it isn't a lasting or sustainable solution. When you were in sort of high school and college, after the panic attacks of childhood, and you started to hide it, it still manifests in some way. How was it for you? Like, how did it feel inside your body?
I had somebody ask me once, like, where in my body do I feel my anxiety? And I would say it's in my stomach.
Me too.
There was a classic. I spent much of my childhood and adolescence feeling nauseous.
Mm.
I have a phobia about vomiting. And I only learned much later from doctors that that's classic for children. A classic manifestation in children of anxiety is nausea. So that's definitely where I hold it. And, ironically, like, I'm sure we'll get to this, alcohol works at first. Then it slowly stops working, and then it boomerangs and actually fuels the anxiety. I love there's a saying that I heard somebody say once that there were 3 stages to my alcoholic career, which is, and it's true for me, it's magic, medicine, misery.
Mm.
And the magic is those first few years when it works.
Mhm.
And it worked for me for a while, a long while. I had a very, very slow ramp up to, alcoholic drinking. And then it was medicinal. I had to have it. And then it was just misery. It was like just misery. And you're chasing your tail. And why doesn't this work anymore? And maybe if I drink more, it'll work. And then I drink more. And then you feel, getting back to what I was just saying, really crappy, like, not that nausea in the morning from the hangover. It mirrors the nausea that I would feel just from my anxiety. So I had it all compounded. I mean, the end of my drinking was just such a terrible, miserable chapter of my life.
Yeah. So let's go back to that first sort of news broadcast, and everybody took you out for drinks to commiserate, and so pick up there.
Well, I started in television news in the 1980s, late 1980s, after I graduated from college. And I came on the tail end of, I mean, there were all sorts of, I always hear everybody say in my profession, there's a lot of, substance use abuse. And I think everybody says that about their profession, but it's certainly true of television news. There were legendary stories of people doing lines of coke in the control rooms, and hard drinkers. People drank hard. It was there was enormous pressure to come in every day and with an empty board and figure out what all the several hours worth of news broadcasts would look like, and then scrambling to put it all together and scrambling to get all the elements you need. And it's an intensely, brutally competitive business, not just between your station when I was in local news, or later on my network when I was in network news, and the others, but even within. Sometimes the most intense, brutal competition was within the newsroom from my very colleagues who were also competitors, who got the best story, who got the lead story, who got the most time, who did the best job. And sort of, to the release valve for all of that, for so many of us, was to go, drink after the shows were over. But, it wasn't just then. Once I realized the power of alcohol to make my life seem better and to make me feel the way I thought I should be feeling, instead of the way I normally felt without it, I drank every night. I would, have, I guess there would be a handful of nights in my 20s and even 30s, when I stopped drinking, but when I didn't drink a night or two. But I would have a couple glasses of wine a night. And I had a couple incidents in my 20s where I drank too much and really paid a price and thought, oh my God, I can't do that again. But I'll never forget, I had moved to New York. I was working for NBC, and I was home just cooking. Like, for the longest time, I couldn't imagine cooking without sipping wine.
Yeah.
I was cooking and I was all alone. And I remember the very first time I drank an entire bottle of wine all by myself, and looking at the empty bottle and thinking, oh my God, how did I do that? A decade later, it was like the race to the bottom of the bottle. So it was a slow ramp up for me. And I never had anybody in my life tell me until I met my now ex-husband. When we were dating, he was the very first person in my life, and that was in my late 30s, to tell me I drank too much, that I had a problem with alcohol. Nobody ever said a word. And I'm not sure I drank that differently from a lot of people. I'm not sure it looked that different. But if I'm being very honest, and I've been honest in doing a lot of work in my sobriety, when I look back, there were all sorts of little warning lights, that were blinking throughout those 2 decades, that I paid no attention to.
Yeah, for sure. So when was the transition, would you say, can you put your finger on it, from sort of magic to medicinal? And what did that look like?
I think that's a very fuzzy line. A clearer line is the transition from medicinal to misery. I just know it just took more and more to get to the magical part. Like, whereas initially half a glass of wine would get me there, a couple sips would get me there, and then I would have a glass or two and that would be it. But my drinking very slowly ramped up. It was several glasses of wine. It was 2 or 3 glasses of wine. Then it was finally, when I got to New York, on occasion, it was an entire bottle of wine. So I just noticed that line's fuzzy because it wasn't a clear, definitive change, but it took more for it to work. Gradually, it took more and more for it to work. And I think, after, in my late 30s, I transitioned from NBC News to ABC News. And I originally was on Good Morning America, and you have to be up so early and be so disciplined that, I couldn't drink that much. But, and I write about this in my book, there was that was a very, very hard year and a half when I came to ABC. It was very difficult. And once they moved me off Good Morning America to the primetime news magazine shows, I was sort of liberated to, drink again as I would like. and I was dating somebody at that time who drank a lot, and I just went right along with him. And that was, I think, when my drinking definitely took a hard turn. It became much more excessive. I was drinking much more. And even though that was the time in my life when I would get up every morning and I would go to the gym and I would run on the treadmill for an hour and sweat out all the poison in my body and slug back liters of water and Gatorade to rehydrate. And I would go and work and do my job and do it really well. But I was drinking way too much. And it was shortly after that I met my ex-husband, and he was the first person to tell me, like, you've got a problem.
Yeah, for sure. So then what were besides him telling you, were there other signs for you that you were like, okay, I'm thinking that something needs to change, or how did that come up?
Yeah. Like going through an entire day of, even with that hour in the gym, feeling absolutely miserable. Going through the entire day, just waiting to be done with work so I could go have a glass of wine. And that's when it definitely was medicinal. That's when I noticed that the only thing that would help, it was the beginning of that chapter where the only thing that would help me feel better after drinking so much the night before was more alcohol. Like for many, many years, I could go to the gym and I would be okay and feel just fine. It was during those many years there that it definitely tipped over into, no matter what, it was like I felt miserable. And of course, Annie, the effort it took to hide that, to keep that a secret. I mean, long before I was keeping my drinking a secret, I was keeping my hangovers a secret.
Right.
Pretending I didn't feel nauseous and shaky and dehydrated, and pretending I felt just fine when I felt absolutely miserable, and I should have been somewhere getting IV rehydration or something. I mean, they didn't have that then. I know a lot of people do that who still drink a lot. That was definitely the medicinal part. It's tipping into the misery part of drinking.
Yeah, I remember a time when I was in London and we'd all been out drinking the night before, and I felt so bad during the day, and I just couldn't get it back together, worse than I'd ever felt. And I like had pride myself on, no, I have a high tolerance, I can handle it. And I remember walking to sort of the corner shop and like looking at those little mini bottles of wine at about 11 a.m. and being like, okay, just gonna buy, and just like, if I just drink one of these, I'm gonna feel better. We'll just take everything away. And I was like about to check out, and I'm like, am I gonna do it? Am I not gonna do it? Am I gonna do it? Am I not gonna do it? And I think I did it. I'm pretty sure I did it. But I remember it being such a like, am I gonna drink during the day to help combat this hangover from the night before?
Yeah, it's really bad. And the thing of it is that's so surprising is I went through that, and eventually after many years, there were days when I did have to do the same thing. Like, and I have my biggest issue now in sobriety is dealing with my own shame over what I did when I drank. But I too found days that were so bad that literally the only thing that would help me was to go get some wine from, a store and drink it at 11 a.m. because nothing else would do. Nothing else would work. And it's, what's amazing to me is what we normalize when we drink like that. Like, but I think what it is it's some sort of weird survival mechanism that kicks in. Like, I just have to feel better. I just have to feel better.
Just gonna get through this one day.
I've got to get through this.
Time.
Yeah. And I, there was no part of me that said, I need to get help. I need to talk to somebody. I need to stop doing this. I mean, the thought of stopping was, one of the things I used to do at the very end in the definite misery chapter of my drinking is I would get up and I would feel so horrible and look so horrible. I would record videos to myself in the morning, pleading, do not drink tonight, to play for myself later on in the day. And I would delete them all. I never followed within hours, all my deals with God and, pledges to myself had vanished in yet another glass of wine.
Yeah, it almost feels like like a dividing line in your brain where it's like so many promises, like you just know the truth for yourself, and then all of a sudden that's just gone, and it doesn't even feel different. Yeah, and it's so amazing how you can live a life that you feel okay in the drinking, even though like there's part of you that's just like screaming on the inside, like just stop. So
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know at the end what part of me ever felt okay. I don't think in the last few years there was ever any part of me that felt okay. I
mhm.
think at that point I was drinking to forget how not okay I was.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So then what brought about change?
Oh gosh. There were so many things that brought about change, or so many things that in my life that demanded change, and yet I still refused to give it up. It took me years of trying before and I say trying with quote marks because I don't, I could not, I kept saying, where's door number 3? You know what I mean? Um, I don't want to stop drinking. I can't continue on the way I am. Where's door number 3? Where I can go back to the way it was when it worked. I ended up going to a really great rehab after having, at this point, I was just off a cliff with my drinking. Um, and it was actually, it's funny. They had us doing a lot of writing, and I looked recently. I kept the book in which I did all my, writing assignments, and it was really good, like what they had us doing,
Okay.
and yet, I left that rehab, and they were like, do 90 and 90, like 90 meetings in 90 days. And I was like, what? I can't do 90 meetings in 90 days. I have a job. I have 2 kids. I have, which is a little window into my denial. In other words, I went to the rehab and did a lot of really good work at a really great place. And then came home and, did absolutely nothing, just worked. And unsurprisingly, I only stayed sober for about 9 months.
It's pretty good though. I mean, all
It
things
was it
considered.
was a good rehab, and I came back and I went to work and I was feeling, and here's what happened. Things in my life were going pretty well. And then something didn't go well.
Mm-hmm.
And I had nothing to fall back on. I had no support system. I had no program. I had nothing. I hadn't been going to meetings. I hadn't been reaching out to other people. I did nothing to, and very slowly I started sneaking drinks again. And it got, really bad, really quick yet again, and ended up with me being shipped off to a second rehab by my ex-husband, and a therapist that I will never forgive, who had been given a free junket to this place. And it's actually a documentary I want to do on this whole system where,
Okay.
these bad rehabs and how they stay in business. And anyway, it was a terrible experience. And I look back on that as not only a wasted 2.5 months of my life, but something that I really have PTSD from, to be honest. It was a really terrible experience. And came home and, again, stayed sober for a little while, not because of that rehab, but because I realized my life was starting to really go seriously off the rails. And then, drank yet again. I mean, I counted days for like 2.5 years,
Mm.
and I would throw away my sobriety over nothing. And there are a lot of movements and programs out there. And I think even you guys offer a program for moderate drinking, or if you're trying to stop and you relapse, it's no big deal, which I think is a huge thing. Relapse is part of recovery. We need to get the world to understand that. But I would just throw away my sobriety thoughtlessly. I remember having to fly to London for business, and sitting in the first class lounge at JFK Airport, and I had 60 days of sobriety, and somebody came up and said, "Would you like something to drink?" And I, without hesitating, said, "I'd like a glass of wine," and threw it away, So I don't know, there's a great book out there called Moments of Clarity, which are a series of essays from people on that moment, that white light moment, that moment of clarity when they finally said, "I need to stop whatever it is I'm doing, alcohol or drugs." I didn't have a moment of clarity. I just, I think I can tell you one thing. For me, everybody in my life going, "You need to stop," didn't do it.
Right.
For me, what worked was everybody backing off. I had an interim sponsor at that point, and I did tell her one point. I confessed to her that I'd had something to drink, and she was so non-judgmental, and she just said to me, "Well, maybe you're not done yet." And that was like exactly what I needed to hear, because everybody backed off and let me figure out, I have to stop this. There's just no upside. I'm exhausted by this. I'm exhausted from the lying and the hiding and I'm exhausted. I will take that step into the unknown. It felt like a step off a cliff without my parachute of comfort that was white wine. And I finally did it. And I've been sober, many, many, many years, and I'm incredibly grateful for it every day.
Oh, it's so amazing. Yeah, I think it's really worth sort of unpacking a little bit that idea of relapse being part of recovery. So like in the community that I run, we actually, it's not about moderation as much as it's about accepting that nobody comes into this conversation wanting to stop. So saying, let's not make a goal that's based on your behavior. Let's actually make a much more practical goal that's based on how you want to feel. So for me, my goal was I wanted alcohol to be small and irrelevant. I wanted to feel like I felt in college, where I could have one or not, didn't matter. It was a non-issue. It wasn't taking up all this mental real estate in my brain. It was small and irrelevant. And so I was open to that, meaning I would never drink again. I was also open to that, meaning I could drink on occasion. But my goal wasn't based on the behavior or the drinking itself. And so if I approach it like that, then everything I'm doing is figuring out how to make alcohol small and irrelevant, instead of holding myself to the impossible standard of sobriety when I'm not done yet, right? When I'm still on the journey. And so we actually call drinking again a data point, and it's real celebrated. So it's like, yeah, bring your data points back here, because as long as you're here, we're going to learn this together in a community of compassion and kindness and grace. So grace-based, science-led, real relationship where you're welcomed back. I was recently on Red Table Talk, and I was behind the scenes when Kelly Osbourne was filming her episode. And she had said that her women's group, Gammy had asked, like, well, do you have support? And Kelly said, well, actually during COVID, when she relapsed, her women's group, 90% of them relapsed. And it dissolved. And so the group wasn't there anymore. And I was just so sad for that, because I was like, what we need is the group. We need the group of women to all be relapsing together and like accepting and embracing it and not dissolving, right? So I love what you said, that, relapse is part of it. Like it's part of the journey. It's not the enemy. And I think that's really beautiful.
I love that you call it a data point, because that's actually exactly what it should be. But mostly I love what you said about the goal being to make alcohol small and irrelevant, because by the end of my drinking, those last few years, which were just a nightmare for me now looking back, it was enormous, gigantic, and it touched and colored everything in my life for years. It was the exact opposite of small and irrelevant. And I think that's why I finally was able to stop, was because I was exhausted from the fact that it was hijacking every part of my life. Because even at the very end, when I was not drinking, like, and doing crazy, doing things, nobody knew I was drinking.
Right.
And I was drinking so moderately, it was like I was back in my 20s. But it was the hiding and the lying infected every part of my life, and I couldn't live with it anymore. I just I couldn't live with it. It was the opposite of small and irrelevant. It was massive and tinged every aspect of my life.
Hmm. Yeah, that's where I lived for a long time too. And I remember one time like picking up my glass of wine and just looking at it and being like, this,
Yeah.
this fermented liquid in a glass, like these like stomped on grapes, this is what I'm giving my whole life to.
Yeah.
And yeah, and it is just that, but we also have to have just so much grace and compassion, because one of the things that I think is really missing in the conversation is the fact that your brain is doing exactly what it was designed to do. It's just gotten confused because alcohol, like any other addictive substance, has hijacked the circuits of your brain that say, this is what you need to survive. So the brain is saying, like in that misery state, in that medicinal state, it's giving you signals that if you don't do this thing, you will die. You will not survive. You will not be okay. And so without understanding that, we just judge ourselves. Like, why can't I be? I'm smart and in control in every other of my life. I'm Elizabeth Vargas, for goodness sake. Like, why can't I get this under control? And I think, one of the things that I'm so passionate about is like sharing the science of like, no, actually the brain is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. It just was never supposed to be exposed to the levels of alcohol that are in today's drinks, or the volume that's in the fishbowl wine glasses that we're currently using. And so we should stop with the beating ourselves up.
Yeah, it's interesting. After my book came out, Diane Sawyer and I did an hour-long special on the book, and I interviewed the leading doctor from the National Institute of Alcohol Abuse, and she actually told me that by the end of my drinking, my brain had been so high. First of all, she explained to me how the alcohol, which first initially soothed the anxiety, was now actually fueling the anxiety. And that toward the end of my drinking, she explained that in the last few years, I would need a glass of wine or two just to feel the way
Yeah.
you, normal people, feel waking up in the morning. Like that's how hijacked your brain gets. And she also explained to me that people who are anxious, and by the way, 60% of women who are alcoholics suffer from anxiety. It's a much stronger link between anxiety and alcoholism for women than it is for men, double.
Wow.
And she said that for people who are anxious and trying to get sober, they relapse more often.
Mm.
So it's I think all those things are important for people to hear, because I think a large part of the reason why people don't get help today is because of all the shame and stigma around the disease. And there are so many people out there who, I mean, I see it sometimes in my Twitter feed where, I've had almost a decade of sobriety, and I still have people say, yeah, go pour yourself another drink, Lib.
Mm.
It's like, yeah, it's like, okay, like, I don't know, like maybe it has to be 25 years of sobriety before people stop thinking that that's a cudgel they can use against me. But
Mhm.
I think that there's a great misperception out there that, or misconception out there that, if you try and get sober and you fail, we're pulling the plug on you and you're a lost cause, and we're kicking you out and we're firing you, and and goodbye, you're done, life is over for you, whatever. And the vast majority of people, the unicorns in the room of recovery, are the people who stopped whatever they needed to stop the first time they tried.
Very.
Most people, it's many, many, many times. I'm in, recovery meetings with people who went to rehab 19 times. It's unbelievable. And, all I can think of is good for them that they kept
Good for
trying.
them. Absolutely.
Yeah.
That should be
You're right.
celebrated.
It does change your brain. And there's actual science to prove that.
Yeah. My one of my sons, he's a little bit like he has more anxiety, and he's more afraid, and he's just more anxious in the world, and things are harder for him, and he's the older one, so it's doubly hard because he sees
Me
his little
too.
brother
Exact same thing.
flying
Much
through it
worse.
all. And
Yeah.
one of the conversations I have with him is that, look, bravery means feeling the fear. Like, you're not brave if you never feel it. you're not super strong if it isn't super hard, so we actually celebrate we celebrate things that actually don't show us how difficult, like somebody going to rehab 19 times, like that's the strongest person in the room because
Yeah.
they're still there and they're still engaging in the conversation. Let me ask you, I know that from what I understand in your journey, especially being very much in the spotlight, you were sort of outed before you were ready. Is that?
Oh, yeah. Um, somebody called the New York Post or the New York Daily News and told them where I was. And I was in rehab at that time. And I remember the president of ABC Press calling me and saying, you have to issue a statement saying that you're, an alcoholic and you're in rehab. And it was absolutely devastating.
Mm,
I just can't even, even after this many years of sobriety, I still struggle with my shame
mhm.
and my guilt. Um, Even though I can show great compassion and empathy toward others, it's people, and I know I'm not the only one. Other people I know I share in meetings that I'm in that they do the same thing. But to at that vulnerable moment, to be forced to issue a statement to the world, and I had to call both my sons and tell them it's going to be in all the newspapers tomorrow. And I remember one of my sons saying, "Why does anybody care that you're in rehab?" And wondering why he wasn't running the world. So yeah, it was very, very, very difficult. Everybody should have the right to do this, without the entire world pointing and gossiping. And it was very painful. Um, but I don't think I would have written my book if that hadn't happened. I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have. At some point, and then I remember getting out of rehab, and then every day there were more stories in, oh, Elizabeth Vargas is back at work. Oh, Elizabeth Vargas is back on the air. And then I remember the president of ABC Publicity coming in and saying, I was 2 days home from rehab,
Mm.
saying, you should go on Good Morning America and do an interview with George Stephanopoulos and just, nip it in the bud and everybody will stop writing about it. And I did. And I look back at that interview with horror today. I can't believe, again, that somebody, who obviously hasn't ever had to deal with this issue thought that was something that I needed to do. And I didn't have the strength or the knowledge to set healthy boundaries and say, I am absolutely not going on an interview on Good Morning America where I'm asked questions about my alcoholism 2 days home from rehab, for God's sake. It was a very vulnerable, difficult time. My marriage was falling apart. I was learning all sorts of painful things about, what had been happening in my marriage while I was away at rehab. It was very, very difficult. And to be basically forced to go on national television and give this interview, I should never have done that and wish I hadn't. So it was very hard. It was very hard to have all that be so public at a
Well,
time when I was very, very vulnerable.
what we were just talking about, there isn't strength without hardship. I mean, wow, like you are so strong. And
Not that strong. I ended up relapsing after that,
yeah, all
that's,
of that is part of your story. And
yeah.
the fire that I can see and feel inside of you to make this different for other people is just really amazing.
Yeah, I do think, that's the one thing the one, and I still feel like sometimes I have to polish that off to remember, at some point, then somebody came, a publisher came and said, "Why don't you write a book about this?" And I was like, "I don't want to write a book about this. I don't want to talk about this anymore." But I realized that so many parts of my story were already out there in public, and maybe I should tell my story instead of letting everybody else tell my story. Um, and mostly I thought about how much other, especially women, other women's books helped me when I was struggling. That's the first thing I did when I was secretly thinking to myself, I think, I think this is a problem. And I started getting books, like wonderful books written by women who have gotten sober. And it was like the precursor to any kind of support group out there for sobriety. The power of the group is listening to other people tell their stories and hearing that their stories aren't so different from your own story. You know, Anne Lamott has written beautifully about the head nod, you know, of you telling your story and seeing people nod their head, me too. Like there's enormous power in that. And, you know, I think it's a two-pronged thing. I would love to be able to help people feel less alone, because I don't think I've ever felt so alone in my life is when I was, you know, struggling with this disease. That was the loneliest I have ever been. I never want to be that alone in my life again. So telling us your story helps other people feel less alone and less singular and less unique. And once you hear that other people have walked that path too and have managed to get to a better place, you give them, you leave the breadcrumbs. This is what you can do. This is how you follow this path and get there. The other flip side of that is, you know, and this is through my work on the board of directors for Partnership to End Addiction. I have my own podcast called Heart of the Matter, where we talk to a lot of people in recovery, as well as a lot of leading, you know, legislators and people in government who are helping change things. I really, truly feel that we need to change the way society looks at the disease of addiction. We know that, you know, 10% of people who need help get it. That is shocking to me. We know that during the pandemic, with an epidemic, not just of this disease, this coronavirus, we had an epidemic of anxiety and depression. We know that opioid overdoses skyrocketed and are off the charts. People self-medicate depression and anxiety, and they can do it, you know, destructively. Mm-hmm. And I just think that people are too afraid to seek help. We are still in a very judgmental, puritanical society where it's like, you lack self-control, it's your fault. I mean, I've seen the polling data. Right. There's nearly half the people in America think addiction is a moral failing. Mm-hmm. As long as that number stays that way, people who need help won't ever be able to get the help they need. And it's a travesty that we judge so harshly people who are struggling. Mm-hmm. By the way, I don't know if you pay attention to this, but if you look at the New York Times bestseller list for the past, I can't even tell you how many months, it could be years at this point. Look at the top 10 list of the books selling on the nonfiction list. The Body Keeps Score. There's all these trauma books, like What Happened to You, instead of What's Wrong with You, What Happened to You, which is the way we need to turn our thinking around. Mm-hmm. It's not what's wrong with you, which is what somebody said to me when I was having a panic attack when I was 6. And, you know, what my co-anchor in Chicago said to me, you know, at commercial break when I had a panic attack on live television, only with an expletive in there, you know, he was like, what the F is wrong with you? We need to turn it around to what happened to you.
Mm-hmm. Love that. That's so beautiful. It's so true.
But it shows, because all those books have been there for so many months, mm-hmm. steadily, that more and more people are suffering and are looking for answers. And I think for us to judge so harshly, to say it's a moral failing if you turn to a substance to ease the pain, instead of asking, how can we help your pain? Yeah. You know?
I love that. You hold such a beautiful vision for this.
I hope so. Sometimes I feel like we're trudging up a very steep mountain, and, you know, you look up and you think, oh my God, I've only come this far. Yeah.
But it's amazing when, like, what is it? 1 in 10 or it's just a percentage of people that have to get it. And then the whole thing does reach that tipping point.
I hope so. I mean, we know there are a lot of reasons why only 10% of people who need help get it. You know, it's stigma, it's the cost of treatment, it's, you know, the fact that many companies and families and spouses and children will say, okay, you have one shot, okay, maybe two shots to get sober, but after that, I'm done with you. You're out, eject. It's very, very difficult. I remember there was an intervention for a colleague of mine at ABC News, and they needed desperately to get her to rehab, and they staged this whole intervention, and they did all this stuff and had, a place set up and ready to go. And then, insurance stepped in and said, well, no, we will, why can't she go to an outpatient first? And why can't she, the opportunity was lost because, an insurance company balked at covering her treatment. So.
Well, Elizabeth, thank you for your time. Let me ask you the question that I always end these stories with, which is, if you were going to go back in time to Elizabeth, who was struggling, who had just first looked at that full bottle of wine she had drank, who, was entering into the misery from the medication, and you would tell her what life is like now, what would you tell her?
Oh, that it's possible to live and be happy without alcohol. Mm. It's possible to, wake up every morning and feel feel just fine. That whatever relief you're getting or think you're getting from that glass of wine, it's not worth the misery it is causing, and it will only get worse. I mean, that is the thing that keeps me sober as well, is the realization that, because life doesn't magically get fabulous when you get sober. I mean, there's still many, many hardships and difficult times, and I've certainly had many of them and still have many of them. But a drink would only make it all worse. Yeah. And I just couldn't imagine living life without that crutch. And I would just tell myself that it can be so much better. Every aspect, just the way you were saying, how do you make alcohol small and irrelevant? And I was saying that at the end of my drinking, it was enormous and infecting every aspect of my life. Every aspect of my life has improved because I'm not drinking. My anxiety is better. It's much less, shockingly so. I feel better. I'm not lying and hiding all day long. The anxiety and stress from that is gone. I mean, doesn't make life magically better, from the external factors, but I'm better able to deal with the challenges life throws my way because I'm not hungover, shaky, sneaky, guilty, lying, it has made every aspect of my life internally better by removing it. And I have no doubt that if I were to start drinking again, for me, that it would very quickly devolve again. Mm-hmm. I know that because that was a gift for me. Those were my data points from my relapses. I could drink moderately for a few weeks, maybe even a few months, and then right back to where I was, only worse. Mm-hmm. I have no illusions about the fact that if I were to pick up again, I might be okay for a month, 6 months, even a year, and then it would be worse. And I don't want to go back there. Mm-hmm. I don't want to go back there. That's my data point.
I love that. Well, thank you so much, Elizabeth. This has been amazing. And I appreciate so much you coming and sharing your story with
you, Annie. Thank you. And thank you, as somebody in the recovery community, thank you for all the work you do and, in helping people figure out a way to compassionately get to that place of what's best for me without the judgment. We have way too much judgment around this issue. And I think we need more people like you doing what you're doing to help change that. It's a big oil tanker we have to turn around. It's going to take a lot of people.
Yeah.
pushing and nudging in the right direction.
Awesome. Thank you. Have you tried the alcohol experiment? Okay, if not, drop everything and go to alcoholexperiment.com. This is a free 30-day challenge, and it's designed to interrupt your patterns and put you back in touch with that best version of you. You remember, it was that version of you that's living your most joyful life, that version that didn't need alcohol to relax or have a good time, the one that's able to have more fun than ever. Again, this is a totally free challenge, and it can change everything for you. So learn more and join me for a 100% free challenge at alcoholexperiment.com. And as always, rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast, as it truly helps me reach somebody who might need to hear this message today.